And go. All right. So it is. It is Monday, April 27th, 2020. At this point, time is kind of just like irrelevant at this point.
Yeah, Monday feels like Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah. And so I'm talking to a guy I actually met a few months back. I did an interview, and you guys really love this podcast. It's actually my second best performing podcast, which is John is currently a part of a collective of great men in Atlanta who have an organization called Portrait Coffee that we're going to get into a little later. But it is a great initiative. I really support what they're doing. And so, but John also is a pastor, which is something I found out right before we did the interview, maybe 5 minutes right before. And because of that, I wanted to talk to you for a minute, but I didn't really have a reason to. Yeah. And so now we kind of do.
Yeah, come on.
All right. And so before we get into it, just people at home, can you tell them like who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is John Onwuchekwa. I'm a pastor here in Atlanta. I moved to Atlanta 11 years ago. I think I was 24 at the time, to help start a church called Blueprint Church that's right downtown. And then 7 years ago now, my wife and I packed up our stuff. We were sent off by the church. We moved to the west side, moved into Vine City for a year, and then bought a crib in West End. And so we've been in West End for the past 6 years now. Started a church that'll be 5 years old here soon. So yeah, pastor, author, entrepreneur,
all of that,
the whole nine.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I want to talk to you about that too, is because the reason why I was surprised by John being a pastor, and I'm going to say something that's real offensive to, I guess, people in the ministry. So, my bad, which is there is a perception that I even had of somebody who's like born and raised and went to church and everything, but like the pastor, like aesthetic, the pastor way about it, I didn't get that from you at first. And so when you told me that, I was like, oh, okay. And it was really cool. It was a different way to kind of see people, not necessarily like trapped into like the position of like their title.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I want to ask about that first, which is you wrote a book, and can you explain to people what that book is? I thought it was really interesting, and it's really important for now.
Yeah. So I wrote a book on prayer, about 3 years ago. But the premise of the book, it wasn't just about prayer. It was about corporate prayer, like how it shapes the life of the church. Mm-hmm. If you like look back, there's lots of books that have been written about praying, like how do I pray? How do you and I like pray? How to increase your personal prayer life? And I just felt like, man, there's a huge puzzle, but I felt like the missing puzzle piece was something that's super important. And it's really like our prayer lives collectively. And when you really start to, read through scripture and all that stuff, what you find out is prayer normally is meant to be a communal or a corporate exercise. There's a lot of this Western American individualism that seeped in that makes us feel like, prayer is all about me and God, where I really think that it's about we and God. So that was why I wrote the book, just trying to put my little puzzle piece in.
Gotcha. And what's the name of the book?
Yeah, it's called Prayer: How Praying Together Shapes the Life of the Church.
Okay. So I want to piggyback on that for a minute, because for a lot of people, this is either a time of like mourning or crisis or just uncertainty. So what do you say to that right now, when like the notion of prayer and what the times that we're in right now?
Yeah, man. One of the things that I'd say is like, man, now is like, it's a great time to pray, because you're forced to like be honest with God, right? Everybody has doubts. I don't care who you are or how strong your faith is. What times like these do is they cause like doubt, right? And all doubt is a conflict, right? It's when, all right, you find yourself in a place where, for those of us that have grown up in church or have lived in the South, we hear of the goodness of God, but all that we see is the badness of what goes on in the world. And we find ourselves in a conflict. And so, I mean, what we tell folks all the time is, doubt's not a bad thing, right? Doubt is a very good thing so long as you take those doubts and immediately turn them into a dialogue with God. Like, God wants to hear your doubts. The Bible is full of people who not only tell God they're doubting, but they communicate it in the most like direct, blunt language possible. And God is always ready to take it, hear it, and
Okay.
respond. So the main thing is, yeah, man, in times like this, the main word that we have for folks is speak up, speak up.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, and it was something I saw when you were some of the posts about your book from a while ago, which is like this notion of how to pray. And sometimes people don't understand what that actually means, or maybe it's too complicated or too rigid. But can you explain what that is?
Yeah. The Lord's Prayer. Yeah, again, for those of us that are growing up in church,
Yeah.
right? Our Father who art in heaven.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Right. Like, folks know it, and I think we tend to confuse awareness with comprehension. When things become so familiar, we can pair it off that, but it really doesn't mean anything. And you go into that passage, and Jesus is in a group of folks trying to say, hey, don't pair it off things. Don't think that God's just going to hear you because of your many, many words. And then he gives this short, like simple, accessible prayer that's split up into two halves. And I just find, man, if you think about those two halves, that's just the best way to instruct folks to know how to pray. The first half is all about God's presence, God's will, the
Yeah.
agenda that he has, right? So the first half, right, Christ starts off and he says this, our Father. And here's what I mean by prayer being something that's inherently corporate. Those two words are important, right? Because he starts off, and first of all, he calls God Father, right? So many of us are used to, we hear that, but we tend to think of God like as a judge. We think of him as harsh, right? But Jesus comes in, he's like, no, listen. God is accessible, right? God is inclined to you, our Father, right? He's not just mine, he's ours. So we embrace a relationship with God and relationship with a bunch of other people. And then he's going to go on and say this, our Father in heaven, right? When the Bible talks about heaven, it doesn't just mean a place. It means this position of power. So when I tell you somebody lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, I'm not just trying to give you an address.
Yeah.
I'm saying the person that occupies that space is in a seat of power. And so when Jesus starts off and starts to teach us how to pray, he says this, look, the person in heaven, the most powerful being to exist, is your Father. He's got his ear inclined to you. And the question is, if you had the ear of the most powerful person to exist in the world, what would you ask for?
I like that.
Right? And after he gives that, he doesn't just go into the request, give me money, take care of my bread and all that stuff. He's going to get to that. But what he says is this, no. God's not a genie. You go to a genie and you say, genie, here's what I want. Give it to me. After Christ says, our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be your name. The next three pronouns are second person, right? So it's your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so right after we acknowledge that God is our Father, the first thing that we do is we've got to calibrate our hearts and remind ourselves that God is good and he's great and he's grand. So what we need more than anything else is for his will to be done, right? And like when time goes on, in the future, you and I are going to look back and realize and say to God, God, I know that I was really mad about that no, but now that I know all the things that you know, I would have said the same thing. The only reason we disagree with God when it comes to answered prayer is because we don't know all the stuff that he does. And yeah, so Christ starts off. And so it's freeing, yo, to be able to sit back and just to sit back and to pray and to say, all right, God, your will be done. Just praying for God's will. Then after we pray and just want God's presence here on earth, here's what I love about those next three. He starts on and says this, give us this day our daily bread, right? We've all heard that, King, but here's the power of praying that not just with you and me, or not just by ourselves, but in a group. And this is what I love about our church, when you say, give us this day our daily bread, that's not an individual prayer. It's saying, God, I pray that today you would give not just me what I need, give us what we need. And so here's what that does, especially in times like this. You pray that prayer with a group of folks like we have as a church every month for 6 years, and you find yourself in a time where somebody's saying, like, you pray in a group, God, give us all of what we need. COVID hits. People lose their jobs. Folks that work in IT are busier than they've ever been in their lives. So in our church, we've had folks lose their jobs, and we've had folks get promotions. And what they say is, God answered our prayer. I asked God to give us what we need. I have more than what I need. You've got less than what you need. God gave us what we need because he gave me more, and now we share. And so it just turns people, man, into generous folks. And so it's been dope to like see.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that. Like, how's it been like as a minister? Like, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, so here's what I saw. March 12th, we after we saw the NBA close down, right? My main thing was like, all right, I know churches are still gonna meet, but here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna follow the money, right? The only thing that Americans love more than their lives is the money. And to see the NBA shut things down, what we said is, hey, this is more serious than we thought. So we're not gonna meet as a church and spread this thing. So we closed it down. And a bunch of other folks went really quick, and they started to like burn the candle at both ends to get cameras and to live stream, to put on a church service. And what we said as a church was, we're just going to mourn the loss of not being able to meet. And so it's me, and we have 4 other pastors in our church. And at the time, we had 317 church members, right? So we just try to do our best to keep a roll of who's a part of our church. And we said this, hey, let's get on the phone here in the next week, and let's call every person that's a part of our church and ask them where they are, what they need, how we can help. And it was crazy. Like, as we called, there were folks who were like, I lost my job, but is there anybody in the church that needs anything, right? So we're seeing, the best of humanity. Folks is like, I got a promotion. Is there anybody in the church that needs anything? What about the kids that are part of the West End with the rites of passage? And so it was like, man, in that first week, we just spent time. We took an assessment of all of the needs in the church. We shared those needs with our church. And the folks in the church, man, in those first few days, wrote checks that took care of all the needs in the life of our church, and some, right? So now there's some to like share. So yeah, while the rest of the world is seeing like the worst of humanity in certain parts, man, we're seeing selflessness and God's grace. And yeah, man, we built a friendship with folks from IHG, the hotel chain, and they've hit us up like, yo, what does the West End need? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to buy a bunch of $50 Kroger gift cards, and we're going to give them to y'all so that y'all can pass it out. So it's been,
nice.
Yeah, crazy time where we've been able to see the people of God do what the people of God do, right?
What you're saying reminds me of, it was an off-camera comment I had with Jamal Bryant, who I did an interview with right before you guys. And he was talking about the difference between pastoring and preaching. And like,
right.
You know, he was like, pastoring is kind of what you do on Sundays or what you do at Bible study. But he was like, the actual, like, well, I'm sorry, preaching was that.
Yeah.
The pastoring was like what you're talking about. You're doing like the stuff that will never be seen, but like the hard stuff.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like what you're talking about right now.
Well, that's it. Yeah, just it's like, so like this is the part of being a pastor that I think people don't know, right? Or so there are certain guys that are just preachers, and they work throughout the week and they come and preach, and that's the bulk of what they do. But I know, man, the guys that trained me and raised me, the folks that are part of our church, like that's not what we do, right? So the hard part is this, everybody knows that one call can change the course of your night, but that's the type of thing that it's like we constantly, right, feel. So it's like, it's like, you know, people don't know like the just the like highs and lows that come with it. So 6 weeks before we planted our church, this is 5 years ago now, my brother suddenly died like 6 weeks. And then in the life of our church, man, every like 3 or 4 weeks for that first year, and we're a young church, somebody lost somebody else, and you just have to relive it and be there. But at the same time, babies are being born, and then at the same time, folks are sick. So it's this constant, like, back and forth. It just really makes it, hard, taxing. And when all of this stuff hit, it's really the type of thing where it's like, global pandemics like this, as I've started to read back, they usually happen like, once, not just like once in a lifetime, but like once in a century, right? So the last one comparable to this was the Spanish flu, 1918.
Yeah.
And what you find is like, there is nobody alive right now that like lived through that as a teenager, right?
Right.
So as the whole world shifts, you look at, all right, where's the blueprint for how to do church in a context like this? Nowhere. So overnight, like, pastors have to do what every other person has to do, right? We're a 5-year-old church plant with a larger budget, right? 8 folks on staff, healthcare, mortgage, all that. And we completely have to upend our organizational structure and care for 300 plus folks. And so it just starts to change things. So those first weeks, there were folks that are like, yo, I'm bored out of my mind. What are we going to do? Yeah. Man, those first weeks, I'm 80 hours a week. I'm back here in my, study, disconnected from my house. And I've got a wife and a 3-year-old daughter inside, but I'm, 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. back here, just trying to like work things out. And those are the things that are just unseen, but it's, grateful to do it. But those are the things that are like, taxing.
Right. And one thing I want to ask you very specifically is like this notion of, I'm going to ask you because this notion of, we saw this early on, unfortunately, where a lot of pastors were saying that they were going to preach regardless. And like the idea of like churches having to shut down for whatever reason was seen as like an affront to God or affront to a religion. I'm not going to ask you where you personally stand, but I'm going to ask you though,
I'm happy
as
to
a pastor, yeah, like how do you respond to that when you see other pastors like kind of going against what might be against science?
yeah, that's tough because it's like, all right, you know, the Old Testament, you go through and you count like all of the laws that were back there in the Jewish system, and you'll get something like 600 laws.
Mm.
Jesus is approached by this man, a lawyer, who comes to him and says, hey, what must I do to be saved? And Christ says, what does the law say? And the man boils it down to these two things: love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus looks at him and says, that's it. That's this whole religion captured in a phrase is love of God and love of neighbor. So when stuff like this comes up, the first thing that we say is, no, listen, the most godly thing that you can do is love your neighbor. The way that we love them in this time is by not gathering as a church. That's loving. It is. So when I personally feel like when all this stuff came out, it was incredible, or my stance is, it's incredibly selfish and self-centered to gather knowing that, or like you could put so many people at risk.
Really?
For what? Yeah, like, Florida, Albany, Georgia, like, man, things broke out in Albany, and they traced it to 2 funeral services, right? Not to, there's stories about New York, Baltimore, and all of this stuff where it's like at a church service, folks come, gather, and our church is affectionate as all get out. So people are going to hug you and be all up in your face. And for where we were at is like, we're a young church, so a bunch of us may not get it, but man, if we were to get it, not know that we had it, and pass it on to somebody else, that's probably the most unloving thing that can be done. So we just try to help our church see, hey, the loving and godly and Christian thing to do right now is for us not to gather. It's not like there's an affront on the church, right? They're saying nobody that has these laws.
Yeah, nobody's doing anything right now.
Yeah. So from my standpoint, like, we spent time pleading with folks, like, rethink it. Trust me, God's got you. Faith is not, I'm going to ignore wisdom and meat. Faith is, no, I'm going to heed wisdom. And there are smaller churches that find themselves at a place where it's like, wait a minute, if we don't meet for these next 3 weeks, we don't have, folks at our church are old. They don't have PayPal or Cash App. Yeah. They can't give. If they don't give for the
You read my mind. That was going to be my next question. Like, how has that been then on that side?
Well, it's, so the first thing is just trying to tell folks is, no, faith is saying we're going to love folks at the expense of what may be financially beneficial for us, and we're going to trust that God has us. What I love here is, this is a space where the church is the church. Justin Giboney, a guy that lives here in Atlanta, started a group called the AND Campaign, trying to bring both conviction and compassion back to our political sphere. And Justin hit me up shortly after all of this, and he's like, hey, John, I'm concerned about the churches that can't afford or that don't have a way to get funds. How are we going to help them? Because right now, this thing could crush small businesses, but it could also crush small churches. So Justin said, hey, here's what I'm going to do, man. I'm going to reach out to a bunch of medium, larger churches to be able to get funds to give out as a grant. And to date, he's raised and provided grants. I think more than $100,000
Oh,
just to,
okay. Yeah.
small churches that have needs. And so, yeah, things like the CARES Act are huge. I mean, that's one thing as well. Like, one of the fortunate things about this is like it didn't just affect one industry, it affected
Everybody.
yeah.
Yeah.
So apart from major intervention, everything would shut down. So we are in a place where, like our goal is how do we help churches take advantage of this kind of stuff. We as a church, we're fine. God's blessed us with generous folks, and we've tried our best to be frugal. I mean, you come to our church, and
Yeah.
we're a young church, but we just try our best to, manage our funds well so that we can have a bunch to give, and we can be safe and sure in times like this. So we have what we need, and we're just trying to find out how we can help.
Right. And I want to ask you one thing about that in particular, being a young church.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, younger people don't believe in religion or they're spiritual, or how has that now changed, or has it changed at all during the face of this pandemic?
Yeah. So I think that it has, in that what's going on is like, uh, faith is a thing that people often keep private, or they don't talk much about. And they're fine and content to go to the church on the weekend, take it for granted, like when they go. One of the things that this has done is it's helped people that may have been a part of a church and have like strayed. They just see like, dang, I took for granted what I had, right? Yeah, I think folks that are our age, it's not that they don't like um, religion. It's that they're frustrated or fed up with the phoniness of it all. Like, we want something authentic, real, something tangible, something that I can hold and touch and taste. And so this is just providing an opportunity for people to be able to see it. And I love that. Yeah. So, man, I've been in this world so long that, like you said, man, I looked at you and I didn't think.
I really didn't.
And what I'm saying is, man, I've been in this world so long that it's not just me. There's a million other dudes that are like me. And so I'm grateful for this time right now that people are being able to get content out. And it just feels like more and more people are being exposed to, right, an authentic brand of Christianity and faith that like really intersects with real needs, right? So
Yeah. And I want to ask you, before we switch subjects for a second,
yeah.
what has your church been doing in particular, or have they been doing anything besides just like generally servicing the needs of their members so far?
Yeah. So phase one was the home base, right? So in the same way that it's like when all of this stuff hit, the first thing that I did was I drove to my house and it's all right, Chandra, Ava, y'all cool. I got to make sure that y'all are cool. I can't go out and save the world. And my wife and daughter are struggling. So the first thing was, let's shore up home base. And once we, shore up home base, let's start to work with the people that we have relationship with. So what we've done right now is we've sewn 300 masks. We have these forms as well where we're going door to door canvassing folks' needs. And on the front, it's just, hey, my name is X. How old are you? What do you need? Groceries, somebody to talk to, that, like all of this stuff. You fill that out, leave it at your front door. We'll come and pick it up and get that out for you. We've got a relationship with Brown Middle School in the West End. And so we've done stuff with them. We had a rites of passage program for young men and girls that we've done through the course of the past 4 years. And what we found is they have families that are affected by this. And so we've just said, all right, home base is shored up. now let's start to ride this wave out to the people that we're in closest proximity to, and let's just kind of keep this trend going. So I mean, we planted our church in West End. I live in the West End. 40% of our church lives within 2 square miles of the West End. So our aim is, we are a church in this community, and there are lots of needs all throughout the city of Atlanta. We're primarily focused on Southwest ATL. What are we going to do here? How can we help out and serve here? And so, we're just going to do our best to serve and meet the needs that we can.
Right. And speaking of service, there is something else that you do that's not on the pastoral side, and it's actually my background behind me, which is you guys have launched, well, you and 2 of your partners, Aaron and Marcus, have launched, alongside your wives, have launched a coffee initiative, reincorporating coffee, and particularly wanting to be on the west side of Atlanta. So can you explain to people what that initiative is?
Yeah. It's a thing called Portrait Coffee, and it was just birthed out of you go back in the past, and what you find is that when slaves were first freed, one of the things that they did, the first thing they gave their time to, is they wrote narratives of their life. So Frederick Douglass, Journal of Truth, all of these folks. And the reason why they wrote it is because there was a picture painted of history that people that looked like us were cropped out of. And so when they were freed and when they learned how to read and write, they said, hey, let's retell this story to paint an accurate picture of history. We felt like the same thing took place in the coffee industry. And so our aim has been, how do we step into that sphere, that arena, and reintroduce Black coffee? So we our goal is to start a coffee shop and roastery in the West End. I think last time we talked, we just launched our Kickstarter, right? So
you did.
Yeah. So since that point, we raised more than we set out to with the Kickstarter, got the first round of investors, got a special announcement that's getting ready to come out soon.
Good.
A spot there in the West End. And so, it started online wholesale, and COVID hit, and it shut down a lot of coffee shops and turned their attention online. But in God's grace, we already were trying to build up our online brand. And it's like, this season has been crazy, but it's provided a means for us to grow. And as we've grown, we've been able to help serve and bless other people that find themselves in a tough season. So, so that's what we are.
I like it, man. And if you guys haven't checked out that interview, you can listen to it on iTunes at the Neighborhood Watch podcast. It is episode 3 or 4. It is Portrait Coffee, or on this YouTube channel that you guys are going to see this on. This will also be listed in the notes below. You can listen to that interview as well. John, is there anything else you want people to know about you or Portrait, or anything you guys are doing?
Anything that they need to know, they can find out portrait.coffee, or IG, Portrait Coffee ATL. So, man, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks.
No, thank you for doing this, man. I'm glad you took out some time to do this. This man is, I cannot explain to you how busy this man is right now.
Man. So, no, this is awesome, man. Yeah.
And so, I appreciate you for doing this. And once again, you guys, thank you, John, for stopping by and really just talking about that experience. And actually, one thing before you go, I know I forgot, it was on my mind while we were doing the conversation.
Okay.
Before we go, there's a lot of people out here who are either hurting or confused. Is there any words or anything you can give people who right now who may just need to hear something that's either with some direction to it or encouragement or anything like that?
Yeah. Psalm 23:4 is a verse that has forever been etched in my heart. And so I think it was tattooed on my heart when my brother died, and just starting to realize that it's like, this season is one of grief for a lot of folks. It's going to introduce grief into the lives of people that aren't quite sure what to do with grief, and they're going to learn quickly, like I did, grief doesn't have an expiration date, right? It's just as fresh 5 years from now as it is the day that it takes place. Psalm 23:4 says this. David talks about God, and he says this, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he says this, I'll fear no evil because you're with me. And I think that that's huge. What he doesn't say is, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm not going to fear because things are going to get better. The reality of the life that we live in is things may not get better. And the only thing worse than real pain is false hope, right? So, but what he does say is this, no, listen, I'm not going to fear because God's with me. And in that, man, I think that the thing that we have to leave with is true peace is never found in pain's absence, but it's found in God's presence, right? As long as we live in this world, we're never going to be able to escape pain any more than a dog can outrun its tail. It's going to be there. It's a part of life. But the best that we can hope for is the presence of God and the peace that he gives. And what I found, right, you can argue with me until the cows come home, but for me, it's not an argument. Experientially, I found that God is the most real in times where we are the most broken. And right now is just a time where we're broken. And yeah, I just say to folks, you don't have to pretend to be okay. Nobody is okay right now. Just take your doubts, give them to God in the most direct language possible. I promise you, God's not going to be offended by anything that you say. He already knows what's on your heart. Just test him, try him in that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, thank you for that, John. And once again, you guys, please make sure you guys follow Portrait Coffee ATL on Instagram. Are you guys on Twitter too?
No, just on IG right now.
Okay. And where can people find your church?
It's in the West End. Cornerstone _ ATL.
Okay.
I've got it all on my link.
I'll find it. I'll add it on there for you.
Yeah, tag it in the joint.
Yeah. Once again, you guys, thank you, John, for coming through with some just really great words and just being honest about things. And I really appreciate you taking the time out for this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, brother. Man,
thank you. Thank you. And once again, you guys, this is Neighborhood Watch Podcast. You can find it on all social media channels at Watch the Hood. Again, at Watch the Hood on all social media channels. If you want to reach out to me on all social media channels, it's I am King Williams. And more importantly, if you like this, subscribe. And more importantly, if you like what I read or write, subscribe to my newsletter at iamkingwilliams.substack.com. iamkingwilliams.substack.com. All right. Thank you once again, John.
Love it. All right, man.
All right, man. Peace.
Yeah, peace. Thank you, brother.